The Medical AI Podcast.
Welcome to the Medical AI Podcast with me, Dr. Felix Beecher. Strap in for a 30-minute thrill ride of big ideas. It's widely assumed that drug treatment is a miracle of modern science. However, it's equally arguable that modern drug treatment is a very expensive disaster with serious consequences for public health. For example, a drug typically takes about 10 to 12 years to develop, and the cost is as high as $2.5 billion, and yet despite that, 90% of drug candidates fail to gain approval, and especially for chronic diseases, overall benefit is often poor or even non-existent. Well, can AI help? With me to discuss this very important and fascinating area is Scott Chetham, CEO of Faro Health. Scott, a very warm welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me, Felix. Great to be here.
Now, I'm very happy to have you on, Scott, especially because this is one of my favorite topics. I have myself developed AI systems for predicting clinical trials, exactly to address this kind of issue. I have outlined there a little critique of drug development. Do you think I'm a horrible cynic, or do you think I'm onto something there?
No, I think you're right. In fact, the data suggests it's actually worse than you said. The outcome now is, I think we're down to nearly a 6% chance of approval. There aren't really many other industries that tolerate a failure rate of nearly 94%. Could you imagine Boeing or Airbus? Oh, we're going to spend $2 billion, a bit more, developing a plane, but there's a 94% chance it will never fly.
Right.
So it's a very hard field to start with. So we can't make jokes about it from that perspective. But in some regards, given the fact that about 50% trials fail because we can't enroll patients, there's definitely things that we can do to improve it.
Good. All right. Well, let's start at the beginning. Could you give an overview of the problem that you are trying to solve here with Faro Health?
Yeah, happy to. So the problem is, at a high level, as you said, it's, we're up to nearly 10 to 12 years now to get a molecule from the very early stages of coming off a bench to being able to kind of get a study or get patients having free access to it. And costs are increasing. In fact, they double every 9 years. And the underlying reason for that is that the complexity of clinical trials just keeps going up and up and up and every year. And it's driven by, complicated science and us collecting more and more and more data to answer that question. So the problem we're trying to solve is that, how do you make sure you're collecting the right data from the right patients at the right time? And I think that's where AI can help, because, today, or I should say before some of these modern technologies are available, it's really an opinion-based field, and it's all done by hand. And that's kind of why it's so labor-intensive and so slow. So there's huge opportunities here in this space to really improve it.
Yeah, and I guess going back to the problems with drug development, it wouldn't be such a concern, perhaps, the cost and the time involved if the drugs at the end of the process were more effective than they are. I mean, just to say one example, there's something like 20% of Americans at some point on antidepressants, and the evidence for their overall efficacy is very, very slim, if not non-existent at all. I mean, is that fair?
No, I think it's a fair comment to a point. So I think I agree with you. One of the reasons we have to run clinical trials is because the practice of medicine is not standardized. So if you go to your local clinic and see a local general practitioner, or then you went to a different city, or you went to a hospital, things as simple as how they take your weight, measure your height, how they measure blood pressure from you is different. And that difference, and that subtle difference, is sometimes, as you've quite alluded to, can be more than the effect you're measuring. And so we have to have clinical trials to standardize the practice of medicine so we can really tease out the effect. The problem in particularly for antidepressants and anything in the like what we'll call the neuropsychiatric field is that our ability to actually, I would say, accurately assess the mood of a patient is just not very good. And so sometimes the effect looks smaller because one, the way we measure it isn't that great and it isn't that standardized because that's all we've got. And I think the other problem we're learning is that not all drugs work in all people. And that's there's this huge move now towards precision medicine because we know in oncology and other areas who've led this where we've been able to create like parallel tests or biomarkers that we can assess in a patient to see, is this the right drug for you? We need to expand that now for these other areas so that we make sure that we're giving the right drug to the right person at the right time in that journey. So we're going through a huge shift in this entire field with this approach. Because as you said, if you try to make this work in everyone, what we're finding out is due to the genetic variance in everybody, the effect can if it's really good in one lot and it's kind of poor in the other, it means out to be not much at all. So we have to rethink how we even study these things in trials and how we select them.
Now, you mentioned there the phenomenal cost of clinical trials, and I know that estimates vary, but on the higher end of those estimates is 2.5 billion per drug, which is staggering. Why is it exactly? Could you just summarize why it is that the drug development process in general costs that much money?
It's time. I mean, the biggest component of that is time. Because you imagine, for 10 to 12 years, you have a very big team spanning from people who have to know how to manufacture this drug at high quality, for the medical team that has to design the clinical trials, those that have to work with our partners in hospitals, the sites, to be able to kind of operationalize this thing. You have this big machine you have to build and it has to run for a decade. And that just burns huge amounts of money. And the other component of why it takes so long is everything is manual and done by hand, unfortunately. While software has made a significant contribution, all it's really done is mirrored the manual processes we were doing and replace them with kind of like a centralized system for collecting and analyzing the data. But we haven't had fundamental, what I would call business process improvement. And that's where AI can really shine, because it can really help automate what is sometimes extremely expensive, high-value labor that is doing very, very repetitive tasks that take a lot of time. And we're starting to see that. What was really fascinating one of the reasons, in my opinion, Pfizer kind of really pipped Moderna for getting the first COVID vaccine registration approval is at the end of a trial, you have to collate all of this information that comes in. You have to put it in tables. You have to statistically analyze it. You have to prepare it then for a submission. It can take 3 months. That was done in AI in a few days. And they were one of the first people to do it.
Yeah.
Pfizer made that. So that's just one point in this entire 10 to 12 journey. If we can start compressing the timelines everywhere, then we can really, if we can get this down by 50%, which, it sounds ridiculous today, but I'm really hoping when, in 10 years from now, everyone will be looking back going, now we want to get it to 2.5 years. It is achievable, but it's going to take a huge amount of human change and change management for the way we do our work to make this happen. But we have no choice now, because if we don't, new medicines are going to become cost prohibitive and the system will stall. So we're at a point now where there is so much commercial pressure to reduce costs.
Yeah.
We have to do this as an industry. There's just no choice.
Well, we'll come on to the blockages later, but why don't we talk about Faro as an example of how AI systems can help in this process? Now, of course, also I should say that drug development is an extremely complicated business, and AI systems can be used in a pretty much, I would think, unlimited number of ways, starting with molecule identification at the beginning of the process to statistical analysis of pivotal clinical trial data, Tell us about Faro Health and where that fits into this drug development process.
Yeah, no, happy to. But to explain Faro, I have to explain myself a little bit and my
Please
own
do.
background. So my wife laughs at me because even though I'm the CEO of a software company, if you ask me what I am, I'll tell you I'm a clinical scientist. What does that mean? It means I'm someone who's spent their career designing, working out how to prove a molecule is both safe and effective in people. And I've been doing it for about over 20 years now in everything from small small startups to a global top three, a pharma company. And what happened is when we exited my last startup, this is now going back a bit over 10 years, I ended up being the Google X, the experimental arm of Alphabet, actually reached out to me and said, well, we've got all these exciting things in research, in life sciences research, and we'd love you to come in and help us work out how to build a team to prove our inventions are safe and effective. And I thought, well, this will be wild. So I took the job. And it was as wild as I thought it was. Software meeting life sciences is really a fascinating thing in itself. And I was there for a couple of years, and we spun out this thing called Verily Life Sciences now, which is an Alphabet company, Calico, a pharma company, and several other vehicles to take their inventions forward. But this is how I got introduced to software. And I saw all these fascinating tools all the software developers had. And I was like, why don't we have things like that for my field? Why am I designing clinical trials in a table in Microsoft Word? I'm making $150 million decisions, frankly, in a table, in a grid in Microsoft Word document. That was state of the art. So I took a sabbatical from Google, or Google X, and said, hey, I want to go off and solve this thing. And they were very nice about it. They paid me to be fun employed and keep helping them for a while. So I went to Costa Rica on a surfing trip for about 6 months to work out how to kind of solve this problem.
That's so Australian.
Yeah, very. And the name of the company actually came about because I was sitting in one of my favorite surf breaks there in a place called Guiones. And there was a lighthouse. So Faro is Spanish for lighthouse. And I was sitting there and I asked one of the Costa Ricans, with my terrible broken Spanish, what is that in Spanish? They went Faro, and I was going, that's a great name for a company. And it's also when I started to have the decision process is well, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? And I started listing off all the things I hate about my job, which is teaching teams. Because at this point in my career, I was running over 50 programs. Teaching teams the same thing is well, you've designed this trial. Could a patient ever do it? Could a hospital ever implement this? This thing is going to cost several $100 million. Are you really answering the right question right now? Why are you collecting data on X, Y, or Z at this point in the program? That doesn't make any sense. And so what it ended up becoming was a series of features. And so kind of Faro came about. And what we'd solve for is, for the first time, is rather than people just putting data into a spreadsheet in Microsoft Word while they're kind of designing these key elements for trial, we give them real-time feedback on what does this look like for a day in the life of a patient? How long are they going to be at the site for? How invasive is this? How uncomfortable? How much travel time? How often are they going to have to come in? For hospital systems in the healthcare system is, what would be the burden on the healthcare system for this? How many staff would be required to collect this data? How much time from different types of staff members? How complex is it? And how likely is it to fail? And what we're able to do is, because this is new types of data, using AI, we've scraped and structured all of the public domain information from the public health registries, submissions to the FDA and other publicly available documents, and some proprietary things as well. And what we're able to do is have this huge corpus of what I would call benchmarking that you can look at to understand the performance of past trials for the first time. And then you can see how you fit within that. And what it inadvertently does is it guides people or scientists like myself to be really look at, well, what does this look like to be a patient in this study? Could I do this? Could my family member do it? Most of us practiced medicine in a healthcare system or some form of healthcare providing some sort of clinical healthcare. So could I have done this thing myself? Am I asking people to do this? Would it fit within a hospital system as I understand it? We can help them see that with data. And so that's the exciting part, because it really helps, I would say, to really think, am I answering the right question at the right time in the right population? And what would it, what is the cost? And cost, I said, means more than money. We can tell you the amount of money, but what's the human cost and the time cost of all of this? And should I be doing it right now?
So with Faro, you have developed a platform for improving various aspects of the clinical trial process. Could you just sort of give a summary of how that works?
Yeah, no, happy to. So what would happen today is people put together, your concept for the trial. Like, who am I going to study this thing in? What are the key things I need to measure to prove it's safe and effective? And then there's other team members come in from a commercial perspective. What do payers or people that pay for healthcare want to see? And that's different data. What does a patient actually value? So what patients care about is different to what I would say like a healthcare authority like the FDA cares about, and what someone who's paying for healthcare cares about. So there's a lot of competing forces. So we help as you author these things and you put them down, we help you kind of assemble, well, what does that look like? And as they assemble the design, so what's going to happen to a patient on on a certain day and what the flow looks like, all the things I'm going to measure. We give you, as I said, benchmarking and insights. How did comparable trials perform? We even provide some insights, like if you were to do X, Y, and Z, it might go better. Very expensive mistaken trials are what we call preventable amendments. So these happen when you basically found a mistake in the trial and you've changed the trial to fix it. And by mistake, I mean, it could be something where, I wanted to measure this thing, but it turned out it was just too burdensome in patients, and so no one was doing it. So we kind of point those things out so that they don't have to launch the trial, wait for precisely 0 people to enroll, or be able to participate in it, and then have to change the trial. So we help them see those things up front and avoid it. Then what's really, I think, is really cool and exciting. Today it takes we have this design, it's very visual, and it's very quick to put together and get a lot of deep analytics on. To turn that into what's called a clinical trial protocol. And these things are a couple of 100 pages dense documents describing everything that has to happen. So we have a generative AI model that takes this dense study definition, that understands at a deep level what certain concepts mean, and I'll come back to that in a second, and it's actually able to author this thing which in a couple of minutes, which traditionally takes about 3 months. And so that's it's cool to watch, because for someone who's spent years doing these things and working with medical writing teams, it's amazing to see that compression.
It's a stunning example, and it's such a simple thing. And of course, people will recognize that very easily because everyone uses ChatGPT or Copilot or whatever it is now. It's essentially the same kind of thing, is it not?
It is. And in fact, it's, we sit on top of some of those common models, but the difference is, and this is kind of the key, what is different for healthcare is you have to augment the data. So when I said we have a design, a thing that's commonly collected in almost every drug trial is a typical chemistry panel. But chemistry panel, there's nearly 50 of them, I believe. And it's, the common one for trials is Chem 20. So they're measuring 20 different aspects of your blood chemistry. But it changes depending on what you're studying. And so the system's intelligent enough to be able to realize, okay, you mean this chemistry panel. And then because the protocol itself will have to contain all that information and all the subcomponents or analytes being measured in the chemistry panel and put that in the table. So it's been specifically augmented to be able to do this. And then the really cool, fun thing is our system, but others could be similar. We have competing models. One generates it, Another one reads it and then compares it back to the original design in our system, and they argue against each other and keep fixing it until it gets to a point where it meets a certain quality checklist.
Yeah.
And then another one will go through and compare that against the huge corpus of literature and tell you, by the way, other studies that have looked like this have had to change or have these components, and it actually gives you a rationalization then for things you actually might want to reconsider doing or consider doing.
Yeah, it's fascinating because it sounds like a more sophisticated version of the kind of voting algorithms used in training models, right, in a way.
Yeah.
And I would imagine, though, that some people would be listening to you say this and might be thinking, well, I know that large language models hallucinate sometimes, and maybe if they hallucinate something that involves giving a dosage to a patient, then it could be a very serious matter. I mean, how would you address those kind of objections?
Oh, no, that's the key problem you actually have to solve in these systems, and why I would say they're specifically the way they're deployed, and the system is specifically to deal with that. That's why it's not a single model. And so I think that what makes this possible is because it's the combination of what I would say a single source of truth in what we call our design. So our designer is, while it has AI augmented like suggestions, what it creates is a pristine record of what the design intent is. And because we have that, and there's several thousand parameters that define a trial, with competing models, I said one can author it, but the second model, and it's a different technology, will go through checklists and make sure that has something appeared in writing that wasn't in the original design, or have you missed something? And that's why it goes back and forth, because without that approach, you'll get hallucinations, you'll miss. The actual more common one is it just misses things without this kind of competing system. So you the trick for a lot of these is how you deploy them for your vertical, in this case for life sciences.
Now, some people might also be thinking, well, this sounds all very good, and I'm sure your systems are brilliant, Scott, but I could probably just get ChatGPT or Grok or whatever it is to run me off a clinical trial protocol, and I could get another large language model to review it in the same way that you're suggesting. I could do the same sort of thing without any specifically trained large language models to do this. Now, what would you say to that?
And you'd get halfway there, to be blunt. You'd get about 50%, because that's where we started. The thing you have to remember, and an LLM, they're trained on past data. So they don't understand new net biology. And what we're really doing a lot of the time in drug development is we have new biology. We have a new target, or this thing we want to get this molecule to act on. And it's net new information. And that's why we have to collect that from people. The problem is that in theory, I guess you could create an LLM, but you would have to prompt it, and you'd have to know how to prompt it with thousands and thousands and thousands of entries to describe what this thing is going to do. Mm-hmm. And that's just not remotely practical. You also have to have a really deep, this thing has a deep understanding of, as I said, like all the chemistry panels that sit out there, but almost every test that's ever been done. And so that's the catch. These systems, even though they're trained on that data, they don't understand. AI is a little bit of a misnomer. They're not artificially intelligent. They're in many ways like a fancy autocomplete. And it doesn't actually understand the rationalization. If I'm doing this net new piece of biology, X, Y, and Z, how would I prove it's safe and effective, particularly if it doesn't exist in the past? Because what it's looking for is like previous causal relationships, and that doesn't, with net new biology, that kind of relationship by definition doesn't exist.
Now, I'm sure this is a question you get all the time if you're pitching your services to a drug company. How could you summarize the evidence that your systems are going to really add value?
That's a great question, and I can tell you we're a 6-year-old company, and in the beginning, that was really hard. So we have a co-publication with Merck, where we actually studied this, and we published the data across 6 of their therapeutic areas. And you really need that external proof. And And so we went through with them and kind of what I would say validated the approach and the tooling for this. And the net outcome for them is, there was a potential, or I should say cost reduction for them of about 130 million across 6 programs. Before you include time improvements and other bits and pieces,
Okay,
which is
let me
still
stop you
being
there.
studied.
Repeat that statistic because it's quite stunning. A cost saving of how much?
It was 130 million.
Wow, I hope they pay you well, Scott.
I mean, this is one of the fun or the interesting things of doing a startup. You never get, in the beginning, your first few customers, you never get to fully charge them of the value you create. You just don't. But the flip side is you can't really refine and develop this without, forming really, great relationships with these companies. And I can tell you, Merck is just fantastic team to deal with. They're a highly quality focused company, and they're just an amazing partner, thought partner to really help you through some of these things. But yeah, you never quite get. I wish I could get a chunk of that, but you just can't in the beginning. I mean, as I said, you form these kind of what I call these foundational like customers, and they're always kind of be treated a little bit more special than the others.
So if you're asked, as I'm sure you are as well, what the key limitations of your systems are, how would you describe those?
It's an interesting question, and it's an interesting one to ask a founder of the company, because I'm never happy. Because it's this really weird thing I've discovered.
You want to be by the beach all the time, right?
It's so funny. That would be my preference. But small children are keeping me away from that right now. It's for different reasons. The thing that I found about myself, and it's an interesting, because I said I am a reluctant CEO. My entire life's journey was I didn't go to business school. If you'd asked me 25 years ago where I would be today, I would have laughed at you, like outright. The reason I did this is because I just thought it was fundamentally important that someone had to solve this problem, and that since I didn't see anyone else doing it, would be me. But to get back to your question is, what I found in stepping into this role, which is new for me, or new in that I've been doing it for 6 years now, is that I'm never quite happy because I'm always looking into the future of what we'll have in 6 months from now. So my entire thought process always lives into the future. And I think our biggest limitation is more around the fact that there's so much work to be done here in what I would say automating everything from the design of a clinical trial, on the first step of just automating the protocol. But there's, dozens and dozens of vendors that read a protocol and hand program their systems right now, which take months.
Yeah.
And there's also the manual process of informing sites and getting feedback from them. There is just so much work to be done in rethinking the way we do things, even the way we budget and contract with hospital systems. We have the potential to automate all of this, which is actually where a huge chunk of the time is going. And so, if you ask me what the limitation is that we're on the start of what I would say is, nearly a 10-year journey to rethink what the end-to-end, platform or ecosystem is for this space. And I think the limitation is we're probably like 1% now along that journey and where I'd love to be. And so I think that's the thing and the other catch is once you start automating one part, the customers go, well, hang on, what about this next thing? And what about this next thing? Yeah. And what about this next thing? And so you start like running into things that's like, well, you get to here, but I now need this thing because you've changed X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
So that's the limitation of making fundamental changes to the way things have been done before. Because up until, I guess, us, everything for my entire career has been designed in a document, and pivoting that to something completely new is a big change because it just impacts so many things and people.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, look, people might be listening and thinking, Most of what you've talked about sounds like it might save drug companies money, but they don't really care about the drug companies. They may not even be big fans of the drug companies at all. How will it affect the general public and public health, would you say?
Well, it will, because here's the reality of why drugs cost so much. I'll push back because I argue this endlessly. People like to, thump on drug companies. The reality is the reason drugs are expensive is because with a 94% failure rate and a couple of $1 billion to get a molecule to market, it means for people to take that financial bet, there has to be a hell of a lot of a big return. So you have to charge a lot for a drug, or there would be no investment in this space and we would have no new things. That's just that's just maths and the way our economics work. So why does reducing the time to get drugs to market matter? One is the faster we get new things to market, frankly, the better for people, because I can tell you the next generation of drugs coming out they are much, much better than what we've had before. They're much more targeted. We understand who they work in, and their effect is, and for the most part, the effect of most of these is a lot higher, is a lot larger, thankfully, particularly in neuroscience that we were talking about earlier. And the other thing is the more we compress the time and we reduce the cost and improve the outcome rate, the less the return has to be by the investors and people that fund these companies, whether they're on the public market or it's by venture capital. So it's one of these things, if you want to reduce the cost of drugs, you have to get this time down.
Yeah.
It's the main driver of everything, is time.
It makes sense. But I suppose another part of the answer might be that AI can not just deliver new drugs, but can target better drugs that we already have, right? So it's not about drug development, but also just drug targeting.
Yeah, no, exactly. And that's some what I think is some of the really exciting stuff going on.
Absolutely. All right. Look, Scott, it's been a fantastic discussion. Really enjoyed it. There's one last question, however, and that is, what is your favorite current example of a medicalized system that's got nothing to do with your own?
Oh, I think you just said it, is, there's companies like Recursion and others that are really digging into, one is using AI to design new molecules. Personally, I find that less fascinating. What I find it is helping you understand who are the best patients to use this in. And what's really interesting too, and I think I know there's a couple of companies coming up in this space. I'm waiting for the startup that goes and buys all the things that we've studied previously, and we know they're already safe, but the effectiveness was not great.
Yeah.
If you could go and retrospectively analyze that data and go, right, actually it worked really well in this small group of people, you could get that, you could impact the lives of those people and get that to market really quickly and save a hell of a lot of money, because otherwise we've already sunk $1 billion potentially. So we should just go back. Someone should just go back and try and repurpose all these things. So if someone's got for me, it's like I'm waiting for that big startup in that space.
Do you know, that's exactly what I did with prostate cancer and bicalutamide, actually, myself, like 3 years ago. So it's very nice. I'm not going to disagree, is my point. Scott, brilliant. It's been a fantastic discussion. Thank you so much. And look, the absolute best of luck with Faro Health. I really hope it goes well for you.
Thank you. And thank you for having me.
Cheers, Scott. Bye-bye then.
Yeah, bye.
Thanks for listening. Ping me on LinkedIn if you have any ideas on new subjects or guests.